On the planet Wallach Ikes, in the 12th year of the Emperor Paul Atreides' reign, the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam hosts a secret planning meeting to overthrow Atreides. Committed to the plot are Seidel, a face dancer from the planet Delax, and Edric, a fish-like guild steersman, who lives encased in a special tank filled with the spice melange. Not yet committed, but present is the beautiful Princess Irulan, Paul's wife, who is frustrated by their unconsummated marriage. It is a tense alliance. Irulan has second thoughts. She finds Edric repugnant, but knows his mental power keep them shielded from Paul's prescience. Edric offers a lure. Only by joining them can Irulan realize her goal of becoming the founding mother of a royal dynasty. She is secretly administering contraceptives to Paul's beloved concubine, Chani, to prevent conception of an heir. Irulan is not yet convinced Paul can be defeated, but Mohiam reminds her that Paul's abominable little sister, Alia, has the same genes. Being human, both have weaknesses to exploit. The conspirators need a lever if they are to bring hope and salvation to mankind. To win over Irulan as their instrument of destiny, the conspirators explain how they propose to use a ghost to contaminate Paul. They have had the corpse of Paul's late friend and Lieutenant Duncan Idaho preserved as a Gola, renamed Hate. The Gola will be given to Paul as a gift from the guild, so the Gola can both poison Paul's psyche and seduce Alia. Saito expects opposition to fail, and all power in the Imperium will rally to them. Mohiam is shocked to learn Hate has been given Mentat powers, revealing her hatred of all thinking machines. Edric fears an Atreides monopoly on spice could prevent him from probing the future, as he must for his job. Finally, Irulan signals commitment. In from a secret nighttime walk around the city of Arrakis, Paul is tired, but his mind seethes with envy for those who enjoy the freedoms forbidden him as emperor. Dune is a world under siege. When Paul's longtime and beloved concubine Chani enters, he wonders how he appears to her these days. He recalls his grandfather's insistence that a ruler is responsible for those he rules and must show selfless love. Paul worries he is, instead loosing a wolf among sheep. Chani orders Paul into bed, pours coffee, and massages his aching muscles. She mentions that Irulan wants a child. Chani usually avoids such indiscreet questions, looking rather to help Paul through her sharp memory for names and details. Paul is suspicious about Irulan's recent trip and thinks about putting her away. Chani forbids this, seeing it playing into their enemy's hands. Paul renews his vow never to impregnate Irulan and worries about Chani's safety in the keep. Chani insists Paul have an heir, and, since she cannot produce one, Irulan is the logical choice. Fremen, the free-ranging natives of Arrakis, have strong taboos against artificial means of producing a child, which leaves Paul impregnating Irulan as the only avenue open. Eyes closed, Paul recalls first seeing Chani as a shy, smiling girl, and an early prophetic vision warning him to disengage. Since discovering his terrible purpose, Paul has vainly hoped to find peace. Chani's mind is made up. She will share her man as freemen women always have shared. An heir is too important to leave to one woman. This reminds Paul of something his mother might say, making him wonder whether they are in secret communication. The Lady Jessica has broken with the Bene Gesserit sisterhood in which she is trained, but is still conditioned to think in terms of the fate of the house of Atreides. Paul recalls meeting Irulan earlier that day, in a bad-omened room reeking of spice essence. Irulan wonders at Paul's mild tone while he detects underlying fear about whatever the sisterhood has assigned her to do. Irulan demands a child and threatens to cuckold Paul if necessary. Paul says she may discreetly take a lover, but never bear children. Irulan leaves angrily, declaring this is on Paul's head. Irulan reeks of secret decisions. Cheney advises Paul to walk away from the damnable godhead that the Khazarate, religious bureaucracy, has forced on him. Paul assures Cheney it is not that simple. They agree to go to Sietch-Tabor, their desert place of retreat and safety during times of peril. Paul knows going there will cost him dearly, but cannot compare this with the agony he's caused to multitudes. The jihad, religious war, will continue, following his ghost should he do as he wishes. Renounce his role, vanish, and be free. Cheney mentions a rare, large sandworm has been seen at the shield wall and feels it may have come to fetch Muad'Dib, Paul's Fremen name, home. Paul wonders at the persistence of myth and recalls one of his earliest prescient moments on his homeworld, the planet Caladan. He shudders at having succumbed to the lure of oracles and worries that going to Sietch-Tabor may fix him on a single-track life. It may even make the future. The spider, future long approaching, is nearing. Paul's vision dissipates, leaving him amidst currents and feeling some power lying just beyond his reach. When Cheney begs for a child, Paul caresses her but leaves the bed to watch the desert. Moonlight touches the enclosed garden below, which he knows the Fremen consider a dangerous waste of water. Many hate him for changing the old ways, and he knows it is presumptuous for anyone, even an emperor, to remake a planet's ecology. Cheney worries she has upset Paul, but he reassures her, knowing she is his future. Taking on the form of Duncan Idaho, but calling himself Zayal, Scytale risks visiting someone who has known Idaho, a suspicious Fremen named Ferak. They exchange the rebel's sign and countersign. Although he dislikes his off-world visitor, Ferak welcomes Zalal to his home. The Samuta music Scytale hears while approaching has ended and a balise begins playing. The musician is Ferak's eyeless son, who sits opposite them, and who is frustrated no Fremen girl will marry him. Scytale asks about the layout of Paul's keep, which Ferak has visited. Ferak reveals that Paul trusts only people like Stilgar, who have been with him since the old days. Paul travels by Thopter, which he personally flies, and uses humans to carry Distran's messages. Every gate to the keep is guarded. There is no way in. Zayal, Scytale, sees this surety as Paul's weakness. He will get in. The boy's music has been recording data onto a Distrans embedded in Zayal's brain. He is a vessel, sloshing with data about the conspiracy. Ferak summons a young Freeman woman clearly addicted to Samuta music and the narcotic of the same name. She is the daughter of the next-door neighbor, Odem, a retired Fede-kin, death commando, who is served by a dwarf, Bijaz. Ferak hopes that drugged, she will accept the blind son, but she has merely grown addicted. This is rare among Fremen. Otham is outraged, but will not interfere. When Ferak confirms no one else is in the house, Zayal, Scytale, slays him and the son with poison needles, takes on Ferak's appearance, and escorts the young woman away. At an Imperial Council meeting, including Paul, Irulan, Cheney, Stilgar, Korba, and Alia dives in, insisting the Khazarate are spies. Delegating Korba to lead prayers, Paul notices his 16-year-old. Spall notices his 16-year-old sister has become a woman. Cheney quietly studies her uncle, Stilgar, Paul's minister of state, who is upset by the fawning supplicants and court pomp. When Korba returns, His fanatic eyes show he relishes religious power, and Paul wonders why Aliyah is being so cynical with him. Aliyah is a product of the same Bene Gesserit breeding program as Paul, but as an embryo is exposed to raw melange poison, becoming a reverend mother simultaneously with Jessica. Stilgar is anxious to proceed with business. The first item is a proposed treaty with the Tupel Intense, the last sanctuary of the defeated great houses, that Paul does not want to see further reduced. Stilgar observes if Tupel can hide people, it can hide armies, or a malign's culture facility. Aliyah wants to avoid backing them into a corner, precipitating a showdown, and causing more butchery in the Atreidet's name. Paul is pleased that Aliyah shares his feeling about the price paid by the masses for his dream. Cheney argues a cutoff of melange will harm the guild and the Bene Gesserit, and Paul will get the blame. Paul decides to sign the treaty as it stands, but Stilgar wants him to use his powers to locate the Intense. Paul struggles again to explain the limitations on prescience, and Aliyah weighs in nastily. Puzzled by Aliyah's behavior and worrying how Irulan or Korba might use her words, Paul reiterates he will sign the treaty. Stilgar moves on. Some in the Ixian Confederation want a constitution. When Korba suggests a religious constitution, Paul forbids any constitution because such documents are necessarily tyrannical, conscienceless, and unlimited. The Ixians must pay tax as a condition for his signing the Tupel Treaty. The next item is a Kizarat report purporting Irulan's father is practicing military maneuvers on Seleucus Secundus. A nervous Irulan downplays the significance, but is ordered to warn him about his foolish actions. The fourth item is a Bene Gesserit request for a consultation on preserving Paul's bloodline. Cheney agrees it is time, and Irulan argues the danger of an emperor dying without an heir. Feeling time rushing upon him, Paul walks to the balcony to seek tranquility. Disengage fills his mind. He considers seeking sanctuary on Tupel with Cheney, but know the jihad will proceed in his name anyway, and the universe could take an even worse course. He watches a Hajj procession snake by below and thinks about how these religious tramps make possible the opulence of his imperium. He wonders what they find on Arrakis and ruefully notes his legions are constantly adding to their numbers as they conquer new planets. Only Paul's heart lacks the peace of Muad'Dib for having thought, and predicted the universe. He can find no certainty. Cheney touches Paul's arm and begs him not to fight with his self. They return to the table where Paul announces he knows all the political arguments but still rejects Irulan as mother of his heir because she answers to the sisterhood. Stilgar presents the last item, a guild proposal of a formal embassy. Korba opposes it on behalf of the Fremen who have suffered guild trickery in the past, but Paul allows it, saying he has use for a steersman. Irulan hides a smile, realizing the conspiracy is indeed hidden from Paul. Aliyah peers down from her spy window into the great reception hall, where Paul receives the guild entourage. In its midst glides Adric's tank. They stop before Paul on his lion throne. Aliyah and Paul both focus on a metal-eyed, orange-robed attendant walking cock, sure at the right front corner of the tank. Paul welcomes Edric, accepts his credentials, and is offered a Gola, named Hate, regenerated by the Tleilax and purchased by the guild as a gift because all believe Hate is Paul's late retainer. The Gola answers Paul's questions in Idaho's precise voice. Hate retains no memory of his former life, but recognizes some stimuli. He is willing to serve Paul any way Paul wishes. Aliyah detects nothing false in Hate. But like Paul, worries about what the immoral Tlilax may have inserted during training. He appears to have been made a Mentat and Zen-Sunny philosopher, and while it is prudent to reject the gift, politically Paul must accept it. Dismissing Edric, Paul mentions arresting Mohiam aboard Edric's Highliner, a topic they will discuss later. Paul worries both the Gola and the old hag are bait, but the waters of time are too muddy to know for sure. Stilgar begs Paul to send the Gola away, and, in Idaho's voice, Hate asks the young master to defend himself by doing so. Paul has never known a Gola and suspects the compassion he feels, for this one could hold danger. He is surprised not to have foreseen this Gola. Hate denies having prescience, but this ignorance could be part of a hidden design. Old visions surge around Paul, warning him to disengage, while, high above, Alia senses Paul's unspoken appeal for help and accepts the role of spy. She feels a magnetic attraction to Hate Duncan and wants to be near him, knowing he represents a danger to both siblings. Irulan dares visit Mohiam in her barren cell deep in the keep. Mohiam's new done tarot cards counsel patience. Irulan has informed Jessica, but expects nothing. Mohiam believes she will not leave Arrakis alive, but remains calm. Her oracular powers are too weak to be sure if the guild has planned this. The Kizara sent to arrest her reminds her of Paul's death sentence should she set foot on the Holy Planet again, dismisses her claim to be a passenger in free space, and takes her into custody, all on Paul's orders. The steersman may have failed to conceal the conspiracy, or Paul and Alia's joint powers could have penetrated the cover. The true conversation between Mohiam and Irulan is carried on by finger signals hidden from the monitors. Irulan confesses her loyalty, while Mohiam realizes the princess is too flawed to use in preserving Paul's precious gene pattern. Beneath their small talk, Mohiam issues shattering orders. Explore, brother. Sister crossbreeding. When Irulan lets slip that Cheney is pregnant, Mohiam is outraged, pronounces that such a child would pollute the genes and renew Paul's ambition to consolidate his imperium. The conspiracy cannot afford such a setback, so Irulan must kill the fetus or the mother, even at the risk of the sisterhood losing its inside agent. Irulan accepts the role stoically. As Irulan leaves, Mohiam's cards show a bad omen. The enemies have concealed resources. They may still need Irulan to destroy them. Alia is homesick for the desert, more so than ever since the Gola's arrival. Like all Fremen, she hates the pilgrims and the new done tarot packages being sold by vendors. No one knows where the cards come from. She winds her way to her private quarters, which she has filled with mementos of the desert, and undresses for a bath. Bath time is usually her time to commune with the spirits of all the Reverend Mothers who have come before her, but today Alia feels lust and tension with chastity. The man of her future is near, but hidden. Dripping from the tub, Alia enters her training chamber, intending to clear her mind by working herself to exhaustion. Armed in both hands, Alia activates a target dummy. It comes alive, moving in confusing ways designed to draw attention away from the true danger. The one real blade among the many showing in prisms. Every time Alia hits the target, a marker light comes on, and the dummy both speeds up and offers more diversions. Alia has never risked 8 lights, but today she abandons caution. At 9, she feels exalted and fights on. At 11, something flashes over her shoulder to trip the deactivating switch. Even before she turns to face him, Alia knows Paul is behind this accurate knife. Throw. Accompanied by Stilgar, Paul is angry. Realizing she is naked, Alia is amused. Paul is disquieted by Alia's femaleness as he lectures her on the danger of going to such high levels. And while Stilgar calls her actions madness, his voice is full of awe. Paul admits to once attaining 10 before being stopped and punished. Impatient, Alia asks what Paul wants. Irulan has suggested, and Stilgar has confirmed her belief, that their enemies are about to try something major. Stilgar suddenly and sharply changes the subject. Alia needs a mate, soon, or there will be trouble. Alia is irate, but Paul agrees to arrange her mating. They return to the plot. The guild intends to capture a sandworm to smuggle off-world and start a spice cycle. Paul is upset. The rot is setting in but can foresee nothing. The steersman must be hiding things from him. Alia recounts her fears about the new Dunterra. Alia and Stilgar argue about visions, but Paul concludes that nothing strategic can get by them. Paul receives Adric privately in his reception room. They chat about events preceding the crucial battle of Arrakis, but the steersman is clearly uncomfortable. And Paul is suspicious of Edric's loan attendant, a hulking man named Seidel who is trying to look stupid. Edric is pleased that Chaney has enjoyed the face dancer performance just before this interview. When Paul asks why Hate believes he is designed to destroy him, Edric dismisses the idea that anyone could kill a god. Most observers, he insolently adds, believe Paul is conspiring to make himself a god. Paul finds it curious that a steersman should probe this question, and his mind flicks through thousands of possible motives in mere seconds. Whenever Edric questions the guidelines of prescience, Edric retreats behind a lengthy aphorism about forces in our universe, and Paul feels violence in Edric's protestations of innocence. Violence is possible, of course, only if the traitors have won over Paul's guards. Edric observes that people are always willing to think the worst of rich and powerful people such as Paul. Paul demands Edric tell him who he thinks might be conspiring with Paul to make him a god. The Kizarate, perhaps? Are his missionaries preaching subtle falsehood? Is Paul insincere? Are his bishops power-hungry brigands? How could such fraud be maintained across time and space and involve so many individuals? Surely holes would develop. Adric suggests provocatively that government has the power to hide what religion and self-interest cannot hide. Wondering if the ambassador desires martyrdom, Paul says Edric is obviously trained in the lying tricks of statecraft, including double meaning and power words. Edric responds that rulers are notoriously cynical where religions are concerned. Religion is a weapon, particularly when it becomes government. Cautious after these clever words and wanting the man. Fish, to think he has won the argument, Paul complains that religious mana has been forced on him rather than his seeking it. Edric is exhausted and no longer gloating as the interview ends. Scytale pipes up, suggesting religion may serve many of the same purposes as the Imperium in helping people lessen their sense of loneliness. Paul and Stilgar agree this idea is odd. Knowing he is being set up to destroy himself, Paul angers Stilgar and hopes Korba will sense the conflict. He then goads Korba about his loyalty, and in Korba's evasive answer, Stilgar understands Paul's intent. Paul orders Chief of Security Banerjee and Korba to expel the strangers milling about the gardens, and for Korba to personally kill, quietly, anyone Chaney identifies as being a Sardaukar warrior. Other business must wait. The party is over. Out in the desert, Alia studies the corpse of a young woman. Samuta addiction, inafremin, and Tlelelaxu poisoning are a rare enough combination for Paul to assign the investigation to his sister. Uncomfortable in a still suit, suspicious of her Gola pilot, angry that people expect her and Paul always to do the superhuman, and finding no strange truths in the evidence, Aliyah wants to go home. The earlier Reverend Mothers inside her advise her to be at peace and accept what she is, for there are compensations. Back in the air, Aliyah notes that Hate both flies and thinks like Idaho. Hate says he is amused by the feelings he gets when people speak about his former life. He believes he is probably Idaho. He offends Aliyah by calling her by her given name. Over El Quds, the rock pyramid built atop her father's skull, Aliyah orders Hate to circle and observes a tear fall down his cheek. This fills Aliyah with Fremen awe at this sacrifice to the dead. But when the escort commander questions the maneuver, they set course for Arrakis. Hate somehow remembers Aliyah's father as a friend. Aliyah explains how, thanks to her prenatal awakening, her nerve cells hold memories of countless lives, including every detail about her father. Hate says Paul has explained some of this to him in order to fill his mentat's need for data. Over the shield wall, Aliyah and Hate clash over his remark, Sibyls have limits. He claims to respect her omens and potence, compliments her ability to use his symbols, but declares her careless with her powers. Resenting a thing bandying words with her, Aliyah demands why Hate has been given Paul. Hate intends to destroy Paul, he admits. But then, Paul is adequately destroying himself. Hate knows Aliyah does not believe in the natural law of heaven, and asks why she then talks about Paul ruling by this myth. Even by Bene Gesserit methods, Aliyah cannot control her reactions and flashes anger when addressed once too often as child. Hate apologizes before suggesting she is disturbed by her new womanhood. Hate claims to be devoted to her brother, clear in actions, and easily understood. Aliyah objects that Hate is complex and his Tliliax component is unknown. Hate says they have given him freedom to mold himself, which leaves Aliyah curious why Paul has left him alive and free. Paul, Hate says, laughs at people who want a master to protect them from change and blames himself for the Imperium's destruction. The pilot asks permission to complete the tricky rooftop landing in silence. Hate declares enduring oneself is a bitter pill and admits he has advised Paul to judge, not serve justice, make decisions, keep friends, destroy enemies, and provide order. Hate has advised Paul to destroy him. As Aliyah talks about Hate's danger lying in the way he has mastered his passions, he plants a kiss on her lips, leaving her in shock. He claims Aliyah had offered the kiss. Aliyah is now convinced Hate is utterly truthful. Halting, he advises her to tell Paul about her thoughts about face dancers. He doubts any young woman will be reported missing by the Fremen. Immersed in a spice trance, Paul sees the moon first deform and then disappear. Terror sweeps over him as he studies the city below and contemplates what he has always known. To end the butchery, Paul must discredit himself. He must disengage. He yearns for Cheney, but cannot tell her the death he has in mind. Everything Paul has invented is slipping back to old patterns, and as humankind sweeps unstoppably across the universe, his jihad is but an eye blink in the larger scheme of things. He needs to measure this falling moon against other visions. Paul whirls to see the Gola, who senses Paul is troubled and commiserates. With mentat logic, Hate analyzes that the vision means Paul is refusing to live here and now. The Zen Sunni say, not collecting, that is the ultimate gathering. Paul rages at such nonsense. But Hate insists he has seen oracles at work. Visionaries always fear what they seek. Paul fears his own powers. The Gola becomes pure Idaho and offers Paul what comfort he can. Paul lets the vision float over him, but shrieks silently at the thought of Cheney going back to water and sand like everything in the universe. Guards lead Mohiam the long way around to a potentially fatal meeting with Paul. She feels old, and the tarot cards have withheld her fate. But Mohiam's chief concern is the Atrium's chief concern is the Atriadis' disregard of their genetic destinies. Mohiam decides the long march means Paul wants something from her. Remembering Saitael's saying that creatures once set in their ways do not change, she sees hope. In the grand reception hall, where Paul sits enthroned, Mohiam refuses to be cowed. Aliyah, Stilgar, the Gola, and other trusted counselors surround him, but Cheney and Irulan are missing. At Paul's suggestion, they retire to his private chamber. Paul proposes to bargain with Mohiam for Cheney's life. Mohiam feels insulted when Paul offers his seed but not his person. Irulan in exile may be artificially inseminated, but Chani, who is pregnant, will bear the imperial heir. As they study one another, Paul makes it clear that this is his only offer. The Gola, on whose face Mohiam senses emotion, approves the life proposal, and wonders why the Ben Gesserit has not used Tlailak's methods heretofore. Mohiam wonders what Paul will pay for Cheney's life. Will he accept a cross-match with Aliyah? Paul is angered by this subtle proposition and feels adrift as Aliyah communes with some inner force. Mohiam remains concerned about the Tlailak's angle. Paul allows Mohiam to consult her counsel on Wallach before declaring he and Cheney will go into the desert for their child to be born. In the wake of Paul's meeting with Mohiam, Saitael visits Edric. Skydel demands to know if Edric is truly shielding them from Paul's powers, but Edric fears real spies and the Imperium's physical powers. The conspiracy is clearly delicate, and Edric fears Saitael is breaking away. The future is too muddy to tell. Edric fears Aliyah more than Paul, but Saitael believes hate will be able to destroy them both. Saitael is upset by how Paul has systematically replaced civil servants and diplomats by power, hungry Caesarate functionaries, but Edric believes cutting off the head will solve everything. Saitael reminds him there are two heads, and the sister is now likely to marry. This will shake truly the universe. Saitael concludes they must move faster or they will feel the thunderbolt. After a heavy workout with the Gola, Paul thinks about Cheney in the clinic. She has taken ill in the 6th week of her pregnancy. Meanwhile, no word has come from Wallach. Paul feels carried by the currents of time, unable to struggle with destiny. When Cheney appears, she has murder on her face. Someone has been feeding her contraceptives, which will cause problems with the birth. The remedies are dangerous. Bearing the heir is not sufficient. She wants revenge on the perpetrator, for this birth now controls her life. The doctors say she must increase her spice intake. Irulan is not to be forgiven, but killing her would solve nothing. Paul cannot tell Cheney the future, which includes her death in childbirth, but insists she do as he asks. Cheney shifts attention to her objections about the Gola. Paul probes him in order to remove Cheney's fear of Idaho. Cheney is mentally far away, frightened about how fast time is moving. The fetus, Paul knows, is aware of the necessity for speed. Cheney arranges for Leichna, Otim's daughter, to visit the private quarters as a messenger. Paul admires the accuracy with which Saitael imitates Lichna's shape and mannerisms, but knows that the Semutta, addicted freeman, is dead in the desert. Paul sees only the edges of time in this instance, but it convinces him the face dancer must not be killed. Rather, Paul must control his emotions, reach into the darkness, and change the future. Leishna, Saital, says the plotters suspect her father, so he cannot come to the keep. Paul and Cheney must come to him as a water matter. Only Madid can unlock Othem's secret human distrance. Leishna meets Paul's clever objections and counterproposals, but cannot get around Leishna's stepmother serving as the necessary Sayadina of the rite. Paul orders Leishna put to suitable quarters using code words meaning a tight guard. Paul tells no one about the face dancer's identity, lest violence disturb the future he must find. Disguised and affecting a limp, Paul crosses from his keep to the bustling Kazarat office building. Guards and thupters overhead and dispersed in the crowd keep watch. Paul thinks about how little Cheney understands about the bitter choice he is making. Paul dislikes the type of persons attracted to the religious civil service. Mostly converts, spice, addicted, detail-oriented, unimaginative, and remote. Bells call pilgrims to evening right at Elias' fane. The temple and the rituals it hosts are recent but somehow imbued with age and mystery. Feeling free, Paul plunges into the crowd. He studies the pilgrims' faces and envies how intent they are. Approaching the altar, Rasir speaks the code word that shows he is Paul's guide. A feminine chorus summons Alia in terms so pious, Paul is nauseated. Paul knows her ritual, but has never before watched it from a pilgrim's perspective. Alia raises a golden chalice of unaltered melange, the sacrament of the oracle, and begins an antiphony with the mob. As she drinks, Paul recalls the sensation of time stopping. Elias sinks to her knees and sways, and Paul feels an indescribable transcendental presence. As Alia speaks, Paul awaits a private signal, but is disappointed. Supplicants cry out, but receive unsatisfying answers. A woman near Paul, remarks Alia, has never seemed this angry. Paul knows Alia is raging at him. With the crowd restless, Rasser pulls Paul toward the exit. Paul wonders what Alia might have seen during the ritual, and if there are alternatives. Rasir leaves Paul in the dimly lit, foul-smelling cul-de-sac. Paul wonders at his own hesitation. Paul fails to recognize from the oracle's Othem's house, Fate's house, or the ancient dwarf who admits him. Paul realizes visions can contain disparities, so he still has hope. The dwarf calls Paul sire as he disappears into a dark side passage. A somewhat thinner Otham sits on cushions precisely as Paul's vision has revealed him. Paul nods to the undamaged half of Othem's face and is addressed as Ustas, Husol. Paul acknowledges his duty to accept the summons, which Dury characterizes as a death watch. Paul is edgy over minor differences between this scene and his vision, but must either let time's passage oppress him or release great violence. After a coughing fit, Othem warns Ussel, Paul, of a Fremen plot against him. The dwarf, a human distrance, holds all the names. Happy Leishna is safe in the keep. They urge Paul to take the dwarf and leave. Paul shudders. Knowing the truth about their daughter, the rebels' gathering place is the house at the end of the street. They know Othem is poor, so they will believe Paul is purchasing the amusing dwarf as an act of charity. In his vision, Paul leaves the house with the traitors' names, but fails to see the carrier. A different oracle, therefore, is obviously protecting the dwarf. Free will, Paul sees, is a delusion, but most people are fortunate not to realize that they are caged. Paul senses hope is waning. Bijaz, alert and worried, is told Ussel is his new master. Othem apologizes for Bijaz's constant playing with words. Paul realizes Bijaz is a Tlilaxu toy, too valuable to discard. The dwarf is anxious to depart, but Paul, wanting to wait out the timing of his vision, asks if Bijaz has truth sense. Otham chats about Lycna and the nostalgic old Harkonnen days. As Bijaz fidgets, Paul asks what he fears. Bijaz fears a spirit seeking him and things he sees and does not see. Paul recognizes prescience and wonders how potent it is. Paul is loath to walk out into troubled times, but Otham wheezes the words of the vision, and they are gone. Bijaz urges Paul to hurry. As they emerge from the cul-de-sac, Stilgar intercepts them and takes charge of the dwarf. Imperial troopers close on the rebels' house, instructed to take live prisoners. Recognizing a soft hiss that grows into a roar, Paul dives for the ground as a stone burner vaporizes Otham's house. The jade rays specially attack eye tissue. Paul briefly sees through a mist that fades to darkness. Still, without eyes, Paul identifies every detail around him, as in an apocalyptic dream. Identifying himself as Muad'Dib, Paul commands people wait for Stilgar to bring help. Paul cannot understand how he has entered a world beyond the present, but accepts it. He refuses to hide the truth and orders no victim is to be surrendered to the Fremen law that demands the blind be abandoned in the desert. They live now under Atreid's law, and Paul intends to buy Tleolac's eyes for everyone, except himself, for everyone, except himself. Paul orders the perpetrators flushed out, and Cheney informed that Paul is alive and coming to her. The forces have gathered, and the smell of fear is strong all around. The keep is feverishly busy for 7 days and then settles into unnatural quiet. Rumors are everywhere, particularly about Muad'Dib seeing without eyes. Fear is widespread and people are fleeing. There is talk of convening a grand council of the Naibs. Korba has been arrested. Cheney awakens early and is surprised to find Paul sitting beside her. As she eats ravenously, Paul apologizes for her condition. She trembles at the sight of the empty eye sockets, but Paul refuses to consider Tleolac's eyes. Cheney notes how tired, grim, sluggish, and remote Paul is. Only a few things must be done in Arrakis, he says, before they can go to the desert. He begs Cheney not to fear him, to forget mystery, and to accept love. Paul promises their child will rule an empire of artistic and cultural greatness never envisioned. Cheney sobs, saying they have so little time in the present. Paul may have eternity, but she knows she does not. They feel the little ruler of the universe stir in Cheney's womb, and Cheney wonders how Paul can fail to realize she carries twins. As she wishes people could know Paul's love, he launches into a tirade on how politics needs despotism and how laws are both humankind's highest ideal and its basest nature. Law is just another word for death. Cheney knows Paul cannot forgive or forget. Cheney knows Paul cannot forgive or forget. His mind is burdened by mutilated memories of things fated not to be. He feels past and future become one as he is punished for chasing immortality. The old vision guides him through his hours and days. Paul asks Aaliyah to preside in his place over Korba's trial, and she watches the clamor as Korba, dressed like an immaculate fop, parades through the city en route to protest his innocence. Heading out, Aaliyah touches a letter from Lady Jessica and experiences an odd sense of mutual contact. Thoughts of her mother always create shadows of the past in Aaliyah's mind. Jessica has written to admonish Aaliyah for trying to achieve a government that is both religious and self-assertive. Religion, Jessica writes, needs spontaneity, while laws suppress this. Morality, conscience, and religion always give way to ritualism and symbolism. Aaliyah sits on the dais while Korba, looking surly and sleepy, is escorted in and seated below her. The gallery is filled with naibs, who protest her presiding, but Alaya silences them by citing Fremen law on capital crimes. She is a reverend mother. She makes mental note of the troublemakers before shifting attention to Korba, who promptly protests his innocence. Stilgar reads the charges with solemn flourishes and probity, as Korba angrily shakes his head. Alia broods, listening to the nonsense. When Stilgar finishes, Korba insists he is not a traitor and demands to confront his accuser. Alia's powers strike Korba with mystical terror when she suggests he accuses himself. Paul enters and announces a worm has been stolen for transport to another world. The gallery mutters at Paul's empty sockets while he describes various individuals' attire and gestures. Korba, Paul declares, looks guilty. Korba insists he may have associated with the guilty, but is himself not guilty. Korba fidgets under Paul and Alia's scrutiny, and the gallery fears Korba will break. Alia studies the faces again. When Korba again asks who accuses him, Alia replies Otham. When Korba declares Otham is dead, Paul asks how he knows that unless he is in touch with spies and couriers. Korba blurts out the Kuzarate had bought the stone burner for self-defense, and he does not know how it fell into traitorous hands. Paul reveals of them has provided names, dates, times, and crimes in a recording in his own voice, and observes several prominent faces are missing today. They have fled with the stolen worm. Paul suggests releasing Korba to the mercies of those who have lost their eyes. Stilgar takes Korba's side in insisting the accuser's voice must be played. Korba's sly look suggests he has received the message that help is on the way. Paul and Alia have withheld the dwarf's existence, and now it appears Stilgar has betrayed them. But Stilgar gives a look that says he intends to wring the truth from Korba. Paul names Stilgar his counsel and accepts no objection. When the chamber is empty, Paul thanks Stilgar for playing this role that surprises even Alia. She chalks this up to a planned distraction. This way, Korba's execution will be seen as following Freeman procedure. Alia names the naibs she is certain are accomplices. Paul asks Alia to take the morning audience for him so he and Cheney can slip away. Stilgar recalls when Paul's secret purpose would not have thrown Alia, to which counter Stilgar seems dramatically changed. Distressed, Stilgar asks if Alia no longer trusts him. Alia only wonders why Stilgar is so ready to disobey her brother. There is no time to respond before the first supplicants and pleaders come forward. But Alia sees in Stilgar's face the replacement of morality and conscience with law, which her mother says is a deadly paradox. Visiting Bijaz in confinement, the Gola introduces himself as Hate, but the dwarf insists he is Idaho, whose struggle against the Tleilax's tank he has witnessed. Paul has tasked Hate with determining why the Tleilax want Bijaz in Paul's keep. Bijaz hears Hate's blood boil when he speaks of Alia, whom they nickname Hot, Fish Monster. Her beauty captivates Bijaz. He observes Alia and Paul are a single person, back to back, half male and half female. Hate realizes he is Bijaz's true target too late to avoid being immobilized by a mesmerizing song. Hate's metallic eyes burn, and his vision goes hazy as he penetrates the layers of the dwarf's being and declares he cannot be forced to slay Muad'Dib. Bijaz mocks Hate for believing the Emperor is what the Tleilax prize most. They produce tools and services, including war, which stimulates metabolism, enforces government, and diffuses genetic strains. War alone has vitality, and those who recognize its value enjoy self-determination. Bijaz is delighted to see anger arise in Hate and declares he must now awaken the awareness that he is Idaho, an extraordinary killer, lover, an Atreides field hand. This Idaho element in Hate will submit to emotion and will emerge, focused and obedient, using power, words. Bijaz implants in Hate the reaction he wants when Paul announces, "She is gone." Hate is to reply, "Master." "Oh, Master," and relay Bijaz's message. To motivate Hate to kill Paul, Bijaz reveals Paul carries Harkonnen blood in his veins. Hate blinks surprise and grows angry, for Harkonnen have tortured his family. The Lilacs offer to restore Cheney as an improved Gola, able to love Paul and bear children in an idyllic asylum somewhere beyond the Imperium. In return, Paul must renounce his godhead, discredit the Caesarate, and relinquish his Chom holdings. Hate may lull Paul by discussing Tlilaxu plans for shaping religion to particular needs. Bijaz taunts Hate for believing he can disobey before bringing him out of his trance. Hate resumes their conversation where it leaves off. Uneasy since the Bijaz interview, Hate watches Alaya emerge from her temple and enter the family quarters. She seems out of place in the city, like a hunted creature. From her balcony, Alia watches a boy bouncing a ball and thinks about bouncing in the corridors of time. Today's dose of melange is the largest she has ever taken, a massive overdose, and it has left her terrified. To see where her brother is heading, she must penetrate the fog that the Dunterra has spread over the future. Alia senses Hate nearby and contemplates how the Tlilaxu appear to have left no corner of him unfinished. His metal eyes intrigue her. As the melange causes Alia to swoon, Hate moves to help her. Alia babbles about his danger, her Bene Gesserit roots, and the urgency of their breeding program. The sisters never let go. They want Cheney's baby, or hers. Alia is baffled when Hate asks if she is pregnant. She studies his face and asks what he sees. Hate makes a Mentat prime computation. The Bene Gesserit want her and Paul to mate. Terrorized by the thought an Atreides woman might die, Hate asks why she has taken this risk. Nature abhors prescience, she declares. Hate insists Alia receive medical attention. For what future will there be if she dies? She feels electricity at his touch. Time is overloaded. The universe is slipping in all directions. Alia can find no leverage. As people surround Alia, Idaho holds her hand and she senses he loves her. She clings to this thought. A doctor says they have gotten to her in time, but thinks it unseemly for Hate to stay with her. Both insist that Hate stay. Alia realizes Paul has foreseen this vision of Hate as both danger and salvation and transports her voice at a nexus in time that Paul must pass through. Paul ignores the warning, perhaps hating time for hurting him. Hate declares his love and willingness to do anything Alia wants. She begs Hate not to leave her and refuses to sleep, lest Paul be torn apart. Paul is bait in his own trap, creating a universe in which he will not permit himself to live. Declaring it is too late. Alia contemplates the heartbeat of a child, not yet conceived, whom she knows will suffer the same awakening as she. Below the entrance to Sietch Tabor, Cheney fights a contraction as she watches the dawn. Paul has chosen odd companions for the trip: Bijaz, Hate, Edric, Mohiam, Lixna, Stilgar, Hara, Irulan, and Alia. He has been annoying Cheney with cynical observations. In the clouds of a gathering storm, Cheney sees Shy, Halud's mouth carrying the incense of death. Hate urges her inside. Hate says Paul's fear of her bearing children is partly natural concern and partly memory of their firstborn, whom the Sardaukar killed. Chani wonders if this Gola truly is Idaho, and if he speaks truthfully. She asks for Asul, who is detained by affairs of state. When Chani admits her time has come, Hate panics, guides her to her quarters, summons Hera and the doctors, and retreats to an outer passage. He fears Paul coming to him in grief, cannot fathom why, and so forces himself to realize the Bijaz has rigged some compulsion inside him. Paul's vision is thinning as he stands outside, remembering their first siege, and forcing himself not to think about Chani. Paul knows everything around him is changing. An aide brings a treaty for him to sign. Paul hates this ugly, barren, immense land, so changed by water, and he wants to shout to his aides, worship life, but knows they will not understand. Paul wants to flee from his own mind and stop the vision. Contemplating the infinity of stars, Paul realizes the futility of ruling them all. People worship or hate him throughout a universe he has created in his own image. It is now breaking him in its way. What has become his myth? The Gola, who has been avoiding Paul, approaches, warns him that calling him Duncan is dangerous, and pours out the story of Bijaz's actions. Paul declares Duncan incapable of treachery. When the Gola calls him young master, as Idaho used to do, Paul urges him to free himself and do something human. Paul hears Usul wail and speaks distantly of water sickness. Paul's cheeks are moist as the wailing grows louder. A lieutenant informs Paul of what he already knows, and Paul pronounces, "She is gone." At these words, the Gola becomes a puppet and his hand goes to his knife. Horrible sounds come from his throat, until he finds his own voice and warns the young master to run. Paul refuses, and Hate's muscles lock. Old memories flood Hate Idaho and integrate, forming a new awareness. The Gola knows he is Idaho, accepts the name, and stays at Paul's side as they enter the Siet. Zensuni and Mintat training have both helped Idaho shrug off fear and embrace life. Lishna must see him, Paul is told, and the twins are doing well. Surprised to hear twins, Paul stumbles. Paul is glad Chani's death is swifter and kinder than his will be. As confusion grows, Paul considers he should be grieving. But that is not how the vision goes. Paul checks on his children. Aliyah enters, forming an overwhelming presence, and insists they talk about Lishna. Paul demands time with Chani. The universe seems vacant, but Paul cannot weep. At a baby's cry, the curtains fall on Paul's vision, and he welcomes the darkness. Paul rejects any future as he bids Chani goodbye. When Aliyah insists he see Lishna, Paul reveals it is a face dancer impersonating the dead girl, and Skidel identifies himself. Paul refuses to bargain, but Aliyah insists he learn what he is rejecting. Skidel moves about as he chides Idaho about regaining his past, and Paul wishes for a vision of this swift menace to his babies. As Aliyah bemoans her guilt, Skidel offers to restore Chani better than ever. Paul longs for Chani, but knows this will open them to Tlealaksu and Kaiserate plotting forever. Turning over negotiations to Aliyah, Paul enters upon a stillness within stillness and sees Seidel's knife hand, and himself across the room. From his son's perspective, Paul bares his crysknife and measures a throw that hits Seitel in the eye. He staggers and falls dead. Aliyah rushes to the crib and cuts off Paul's vision. Paul declares, restoring Chani is not part of his vision, and there are some prices an Atreides cannot pay. Still, he had been sore tempted. The newborn son speaks mentally to Paul, who, drained, slumps against a wall and sees his male ancestors. He recalls Aliyah awakening in their mother's womb, but knows no water of life has been at work here. unless Cheney's hunger during her pregnancy has produced a spice overdose. Paul feels himself to be in the crib again, with Elias soothing him, and he looks over at his tiny baby sister, who is the image of Lady Jessica and who is filled with a multitude and staring at him. Disengaging, Paul names the boy Leto after his own father and the girl Ghanima. Behind them, the water rite for Cheney begins, and Paul has Idaho take him to his quarters. Before Idaho can leave, Bijaz appears and repeats Skidle's offer. Had the Gola slain Paul, Bijaz reveals, the Tlaelaxu would have negotiated with Alia to restore her brother. Cheney can be kept from the stills and restored fully. Exhausted, Paul finds this second refusal harder, but orders Idaho to kill the dwarf. There is no choice. Paul has meddled in too many futures, and some problems in the universe have no answers. Paul feels his link with the vision shatter, and his mind is overwhelmed with possibilities. Idaho pauses at the edge of the open desert. Lieutenant Tandis relates how he accompanies Paul to this point and watches him walk, blind, into the desert. Earlier, Paul makes provisions for his children. Idaho regrets leaving Paul alone in his frame of mind. The Fremen refuse to search for Paul and are chanting for a worm to take Muad'Dib swiftly. Some believe Paul has entered the rough world, never to die, but Idaho knows better. Dying without a trace has a certain neatness because the entire planet becomes his tomb. Idaho forces himself out of the catatonic state into which he is tumbling as a mother storm approaches. It will make Paul one with the desert, and future generations will speak of him as swimming onward in time. Stilgar comes to take Idaho to Alia, who has assumed full command but is in mourning and asking for Idaho's comfort. Overriding Paul's request for amnesty for the traitors, she has had Stilgar execute Edric, Mohiam, Korba, and others. Idaho realizes Paul's pattern goes on. The possibilities of the future dazzle Idaho's mentat brain. Paul has set in motion vortices that cannot be stilled. Both the Tlilax and the Guild are discredited and the Quizerate shaken, but the Fremen are solidly loyal to House Atreides. Alia chokes over the words. Paul is gone and deems him a fool. The whole universe will agree before she finishes saying it. Idaho senses Alia has lost prescience since Cheney's death. If Paul had but stepped off the track, he and Cheney would have been safe. Paul's whole life is a struggle to escape his jihad and deification, and now he is free. Idaho identifies Cheney's death with the moon that falls in Paul's oracle. Alia is bitter, being left behind to live on. Alia resolves to save the grieving Princess Irulan, who has defected from the sisterhood and devoted her life to teaching Paul's children. She is now trustworthy, and the Bene Gesserit has no remaining lever against the Atreides. Idaho comforts Alia as she sobs, and their streams of grief unite. They declare love for one another. Idaho will follow her anywhere,